Welcome to the UST Education recorded webinar series. This session is powered by US Transactions. UST is a boutique payment processing firm providing you with personalized service. We offer agnostic, best-fit technology solutions for associations, nonprofits, and enterprise clients.
All right, so thanks for joining us today. As Riley introduced, we're going to be talking about ethical AI, and that means we're going to have some pretty candid conversations about the good and the bad of AI implementation. So first, I'll give a little bit of introduction about myself and why I'm here giving you some of this information about AI ethics. We'll talk about some of the most paramount concerns that folks have about AI in terms of whether or not AI is the right technology to solve certain problems, even if it's got the chops to solve some of those technical problems. We'll talk about how to implement AI usage policies for our associations at our companies that are sensitive and respectful of AI concerns. We'll open up the floor for some candid conversations in chat about whether or not folks have evaluated their feelings as an association or as a company about some of these AI concerns, and then we'll of course leave some time for questions at the end. So I work for Fíonta. Fíonta is a diverse, inclusive, and equitable workplace for implementing and supporting Salesforce and web clients via digital services. And we value diversity and ethics pretty highly, which is why I feel empowered and excited to share some of this content with you about AI. So our expertise is in CRM, AMS implementations, user experience, and UI design, but we also do managed services, which is my department here at Fíonta. And we were founded in 2001. We've served over 1,200 association and nonprofit clients, primarily in Salesforce, especially recently. We're a women-owned and led organization. And I have spent the last 5 years partnering with associations and nonprofits specializing in managed services support, strategic advisory, and artificial intelligence research and implementation, which is why I'm here today. I live in Baltimore, Maryland, with my boyfriend, my cat, and our new puppy in a 100-year-old home that we've been slowly restoring. So this is a really complex topic, and I wanted to give you some background before we jump in that I think it would be easy for us to jump into this conversation with lots of kind of study and citations of data, but this is a really new and emerging technology field, as we all know. And there are lots of differing opinions about the severity of some of these concerns and how we can actually calculate some of the impacts that AI has had and will continue to have as the technology develops. So we're going to be talking at a pretty high level about some of these concerns, also because although I do AI research, I am not necessarily an ecologist or a labor researcher. So I want to keep the conversation kind of high level so that we can go through a lot of these concerns. But if there's interest in supplemental research material, there's certainly lots of places that you can go to drill down in more detail into some of these concerns, whether they lean more positive on the AI stance or negative on the AI stance. So if you've been to one of my AI sessions before, this is going to feel a little repetitive, but I always like to make sure that everybody's on the same page when we're talking about what AI is and isn't. I'll keep this brief though, because I think a lot of folks that are here to learn about AI ethics have some high-level understanding of AI. So there's a couple of acronyms that you'll hear when people talk about AI. You'll hear me talk about GPT, a generative pre-trained transformer like ChatGPT or Claude. This is a particular type of generative AI tool, and we'll talk about what generative AI is in just a second. That is basically this way that I can kind of interact with an AI data set, and it can generate responses for me. And an LLM is a large language model. And that, again, at a really high level is kind of this big data set we might call a corpus of terabytes and terabytes and terabytes of data, this massive incalculable volume of data that an AI has access to via an LLM. And what an AI is doing when I ask it questions like, what temperature should I cook my turkey at on Thanksgiving? It's combing through at a really, really rapid clip all of this huge amount of data that's built out of Wikipedia and Reddit posts and encyclopedias, but also Facebook posts and all sorts of satire content online. And it's looking for the most probable response to my question that looks like or is shaped like the response to my question. And it wants to do that as completely and quickly as possible in a way that satisfies me as a user. We could talk for much longer, but we wouldn't have time to get into the ethics conversation about why that means that AI is sometimes a great tool to solve your problem and sometimes a less great tool to solve your problem, because its goal is to fully answer your question, but not necessarily to accurately answer your question. Um, but I think it's important for us to think about as we're evaluating um, some of these ethical concerns and whether or not they would preclude us wanting to use AI to solve a certain problem, whether or not AI really is the right tool to solve that problem. Because if AI is qualified to effectively solve our problems, some of these ethical concerns might be more worthwhile. Some of these consequences might feel more valuable to us than if AI doesn't consistently give us the right answers to our questions because it doesn't know them. It doesn't really know anything. If you hear people talk about weak AI, that's what they mean. AI doesn't have the ability to look into the magic 8 ball and know the correct answer to your question. It is just finding something that, like I said, is kind of shaped like the answer to your question. And there's three categories of AI broadly that we think about in this type of consumer-ish application. Generative, which is the generative and generative pre-trained transformer, or ChatGPT. And this is any type of AI that generates content for us in response to a plain language prompt. So that includes something like ChatGPT, where I ask it a question and it generates a text answer for me. That also includes tools like Sora or Meta AI, where it can make a picture for me, it can make a video for me, or it can make an audio file for me. Anything that an AI doing that is making something for you that didn't exist before, that's going to fall into that generative category. And a lot of the ethical concerns that we're talking about in the public eye and in the eyes of your members or your staff, a lot of those concerns are going to lean into this generative AI camp more than predictive or agentic, more than predictive especially. Agentic AI is like generative AI plus in the sense that an AI agent is going to look oftentimes like a chatbot, right? If you've gone onto any sort of e-commerce platform recently and you've tried to refund an order and you've gone to talk to what used to be a live person on the other end of the chat box and it's now an AI, you have interacted with an AI agent. So it has this generative element to it where it can generate responses to you. It sounds like you're talking to a person, but that agent is also hooked up to an e-commerce platform or to your CRM or your AMS, and it can do stuff that a person would be able to do. So it can refund your purchase, it can generate a new membership order, and it can help you update your member profile online, things like that. So that's an agent, right? It's got all of this generative element, and it's also hooked into some of this action that it can complete. So some of our generative concerns will also lean into our agent concerns, but the core of, again, what people are the most worried about is generative AI. Predictive AI is a little bit different in the sense that when we think about predictive AI, we're looking at past history of our own data to predict future elements of our own data. The reason why folks don't have as many ethical concerns about predictive AI or modeling like this is twofold. One is that we're looking mostly at our own data. We're not necessarily extrapolating out to other people's data that might have been sourced unethically, as we'll talk about in a little bit. And a lot of times, predictive AI, outside of, in an association context, we're looking at modeling our own member retention. A lot of the use cases for predictive AI are really compelling. They have extreme net positives for human society. So one of the most classic examples is medical imaging. There's some really strong predictive AI, really robust predictive AI that's coming out for looking at medical imaging and identifying certain signs of early concern for certain severe medical conditions using AI, right? Using analytics to try and figure out, oh, this little blip that I see on this scan looks like something that could in the future be concerning, so you should talk to a healthcare professional. And this is something that is really valuable. And so certain ethical concerns about environmental impact of a tool like that seem really worth potential environmental risks or potential risks to other areas that we might see ethical concerns. Versus me going to ChatGPT and saying, can you generate a cute picture of me and my dog, right? That does not necessarily carry the same weight of good for human society that feels worth some of the ethical concerns that we're going to talk about. So that's, again, why we're going to be focusing more on some of these generative use cases. So What are the three major concerns that we're going to talk about? We're going to leave aside concerns of AI not being the right tool to solve our problems. So we're going to operate under the assumption during this talk that AI is good enough at solving some of our problems mostly. Because again, there's some thought of, does AI actually solve the problems that we're trying to solve? So we're going to, as a group, agree that we're talking about use cases where AI can be helpful generally for us. So those three concerns that you'll hear from either the public when you see people talk about AI online, maybe from your members as you hear them talk about AI, or from your staff as you hear them talk about AI. Those are environmental, intellectual property, and job security. Our environmental concerns usually fall under water and power usage, although we'll talk about some more concerns there as we get into the meat of this conversation. Intellectual property, we're primarily talking about ownership of training data or the origin of our training data and the ownership of our outputs. And third is job security, which is primarily going to be a concern that you might hear from your staff about your staff kind of automating themselves out of a job. So, an engagement question I'd love for folks to answer in chat is, are any of these concerns that either you personally have about AI or that your association or your company has talked about as you've looked into whether or not you want to implement AI? So, in terms of environmental concerns, this might be the one that you've heard folks talk about with the most fervor in, recent months and years as AI has developed and become the only thing that it feels like people like me in tech want to talk to you about. So, these concerns are broad, and again, we're going to keep this kind of high level, so you'll forgive me not having a background in environmental sciences as I share some of this research with you. But um, AI data centers, which are popping up all over the world at this point, as there are more companies that are looking to develop their own LLM or develop their own features for their existing tech products. These data centers, because they are processing this huge corpus of all of the human knowledge that we can capture from the internet, and they need to do it very quickly, they need to process those questions and those responses very quickly, they take a lot of power, right? And a lot of times they are taking that power off of one, a power grid that might not be well equipped to handle that type of draw. And two, even if that power grid is well equipped to handle that type of draw, we often find that an AI data center opening up in a particular area rapidly increases energy costs for the folks that already lived in that place before that AI data center was developed. So if you live in an area like I do, where there has been consideration of AI data centers being bought and installed in our area, there's lots of pushback from the people that live in my area about the fact that our energy bills are already high. And if something is going to quintuple energy costs or vastly increase energy costs for the average homeowner, when things are already hard for us, cost-wise on energy, that's a concern. And that concern is often higher if we are not in an area that is using renewable energy, right? So if we're using non-renewable sources of energy and all of a sudden the energy use in our area goes up, there's even higher concern about the fact that we're using natural gas or coal or things like that to generate all of this additional power that's needed to power these massive data centers. And another thing that to know about these types of massive kind of supercomputers, right, is that they need to operate at an ideal temperature, which is often cooled by water. In a really ideal world, we would think about a model where that water cooling is provided by gray water or non-potable water in a way that does not take drinking water and turn it into gray water or non-potable water, right? If we could be taking water that can't be consumed by humans, agriculture, or anything like that, and we just keep it out of the water system, maybe that's okay, but that's not, I think, what's happening right now. What we're seeing right now is that you might have seen some, news features where folks who live in an area where an AI data center opened recently, they turn on their tap and they don't have water or the water comes out brown. Because the usage of that AI data center in terms of the local water is so high that the water infrastructure in that area can't support it. And again, this was a conversation that was already being had before AI. So if we were all of a sudden exploding water usage concerns in an area, this is a concern that lots of folks will rightly have, that these preponderance of data centers are going to use a ton of water that's already not available for the average person or the average farmer. The other less common thing to think about, right, is that These types of supercomputers use some really complicated processors in order to power these types of really fast transactions, again, that a user needs to have. Because if I ask ChatGPT a question and it takes it 90 minutes to generate a response because it's using an old piece of technology, it's got an older processor, that's not a great user experience. So I'm not going to want to continue to pay for ChatGPT. But if I get that response really quickly because I'm using a bunch of high-powered chips, that is great for everybody involved, except the chip manufacturing requires extraction of certain specialized materials like silicon and cobalt that the mining impact of those is environmentally high, and manufacturing tons of them drives up the cost of those chips that could be used to do something else and increases the environmental impact of those mining systems, right? So we see that there's lots of different factors at play around why these data centers introduce this multivariate kind of environmental concern. And because there's so many people that are so gung-ho about using AI, they want a better model, they want a more robust model, they want an AI that does more faster. This higher pace of development is going to push the demand even higher. And as we have more things in our technological ecosystem that require or are integrated with AI, there's also more things that will need these types of data centers, right? Um, Now, the reason why I don't have any particular studies quoted here of, every conversation that you have with Claude uses a gallon of water is because figuring out the math exactly on that is actually a really challenging problem to solve, to figure out the exact amount, the exact impact of every transaction that we have with AI is going to have is very complicated, partially because I just described there's lots of variables involved, and partially we just don't have access to the data that would give us that particular information. So I think it can be unproductive to try and say, every time you talk to ChatGPT, it is this specific impact. But the mindset that I think is productive is I want to be intentional every time I'm opting to use AI, if it's something that I'm opting to use, because I know that there's some net impact that I wouldn't have if I didn't use AI. And so I want to know that the decisions that I'm making are worth some more water usage, some more power usage, some impact on the local ecosystem, right? But we do have linked at the bottom, and I think Riley can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we'd be happy to share some of these supplemental materials with you after the fact about some initial research that you can dip your toes in if you have more questions than we can get into during this session. So intellectual property is another big area of concern that folks have about AI. And again, this is another broad and complicated subject that we could talk about in a lot of detail. So when it comes to especially this generative AI and especially image and video and audio creation, the rights to this training data are complicated because I mentioned that we've got terabytes and terabytes and terabytes of data, right? And that includes maybe every book that's ever been published. And that includes every Wikipedia article that's ever been published. And that includes every image that somebody has posted online. If an artist posted their work on Pinterest 10 years ago, and ChatGPT has had access or Claude has had access to pull that image into their model, then that image can be reproduced out of that model, or it can be used to cobble together something that looks like a Disney princess, right? That looks like a copyrighted character. And the copyright holder did not give permission for that image to be used in that way or to be reproduced in that way. Now, there is some research effort going into developing ethically sourced AI models that are trained only on data where the creator of the material opted into the model. That's not generally what we're seeing with the average AI tool that you could use, right? So there's lots of folks that feel like using generative AI to, say, create a promotion for your business that is based on the artistic style of an artist that didn't opt into their art being used to influence your advertising material is unethical because you are taking some of their material without their permission. And folks will call it stealing from artists. I think in some ways, and justifiably, they'll call it stealing. Or at the very least, it's complicated. And the courts have not come out with a solid answer about whether or not this is legal, but people have strong opinions about whether or not it's moral, regardless of what the law says or doesn't say or don't and do and don't say in the future. The other thing to keep in mind is who owns the output of an AI model, right? If I'm a business owner and I'm creating material for my business, I want it to be my own material. I want it to be my proprietary information. But one thing that has been resolved in the courts currently and might change in the future is I can't copyright something that I create with AI. So if I'm looking to create proprietary material for my business, I have no ownership over what the AI spits out for me, which is a maybe different sounding stance than some of the ethical concerns that we've talked about so far. Um, but it's another concern to think about. I don't want to generate material that I'm going to try and put my stamp on and generate revenue from when actually it was not something that I can prove ownership of outputs all the way through. And some AI tools have in their policies that they're surrendering ownership to you once you generate the material. Um, but some tools don't, or some tools in their privacy policy will explicitly tell you that they own the material. And so that is a decision we'll talk about when it comes to policy sensitivities down the road. The other thing to think about, and I want to be sensitive and not introduce too heavy of a topic into this conversation, is harmful content that gets created via AI. So if you've heard the term deepfake, that's kind of where I'll leave that. But if I'm generating something that's negative about a particular person or that misrepresents a particular person by pretending to be them using AI, right? If the AI tool allows me to create that material and I promote that material publicly, is it my fault for generating something that the AI tool allowed me to generate? Is it the platform or the LLM or the model's tool for generating that material for me? Or is it nobody's fault? Or is it everybody's fault? And much more importantly, to me at least, as an ethics concerned person, where would the person who is damaged in this situation go to receive recompense for what has happened to them? Because if nobody is deemed to be at fault, they don't have anywhere to pursue damages. And that is a real concern that a lot of folks are facing is that their reputation is being impacted by AI usage. And there might not currently be anywhere for them to go to pursue recompense, like I said, for this negative thing that has happened to them, for this kind of slanderous material or this negative material that hurts their image as a person or as a brand, whatever the case may be. So this is an area where there's, again, lots of really valid concerns about whether or not this is right to do. And as we find in lots of emergent technology areas, where the tech is moving really quickly, legislation often takes a long time to catch up to what is legal, even if, again, we as a population might have strong opinions about what is moral. And so this is an area where there are certain things in this gray area where like maybe this feels okay and maybe this other thing doesn't feel okay to do. Um, and so as we're thinking about how we do and don't want to use AI, there's going to be this conversation of nuance that needs to happen where we need to say, I can't put a blanket, all of this is bad or all of this is good, because some things feel much worse than other things. Some things feel much less unsavory than other things. The last piece, and this is one that I know we'll see more internally when we're talking to our staff or our team members about how we use AI, is job security. And I want to be sensitive to the fact that any technology change in human history, or most technology changes in human history, where we've implemented technology that helps us as a society, there is always this kind of change aversion concern. It feels scary to make changes to how we live our lives and go about our work in our day to day. And some of those concerns are just, I don't want things to change. I want things to stay the same, right? But I think especially with AI, because this is all happening so quickly, this concern about what will happen to my individual job as a person in society when AI popped up seemingly out of nowhere just a couple years ago, I think that concern is very much weightier than maybe, when we had 5 or 10 or 20 or 30 or 40 years to adjust to a big change in technology. I think the pacing of this makes it feel more urgent to a lot of people with good reason. And the other kind of weighty concern that I think weighs in a lot of people's heads is if I'm being asked to use AI or implement a process that previously was my work and my work alone with AI, I am automating myself out of a job. You are asking me to do this thing that makes me feel like I am going to lose my job, as opposed to the change in technology might cause my job to be impacted. So I think folks feel very personally invested in this worry. And it's a conversation that needs to be had with a lot of respect and sensitivity for why people on your team might have this worry. Will an association's use of AI harm its staff ability to keep their jobs in the future? Am I asking somebody to do something that will cause them to train their own replacement? But on top of that, is AI actually capable of doing this type of independent work well enough to actually take the seat of a human person? Or are we really putting the cart before the horse, negatively impacting our teams, whether it's just negatively impacting their morale or actually negatively impacting their employment and getting bad outcomes, right? If you've had a bad experience, like I certainly have with an AI agent, where I've gone in and tried to get a refund for something where previously it took me 2 clicks and now it takes me 25 minutes of a really frustrating conversation with an AI, then that can be a time where you go, I don't understand why they implemented AI to do this. Previously, this was really easy for me as a consumer, and now it's really hard. And I know as an AI person in the back of my head, somebody had to put work in to implement that AI, and then they don't work at that company anymore, or they might work at that company on reduced hours. And that feels unsavory to me as a consumer. Does this tool actually do real good quality work, or is it not quite there yet? And we're not ready to make these types of changes as a society. So, all of these concerns, internally and externally, are really weighty. And they are things that the way that I've portrayed them to you sounds very negative, right? It sounds like I am a person who is anti-AI, but clearly that's not the case. I am a person who thinks that responsible and judicious use of AI is one, an inevitable march of human society right now. So we might as well do it the right way if we're going to do it. And I think that there's areas where the juice is kind of worth the squeeze. But I think it's really important to have sound policy conversations that are sensitive to both our staff and member concerns. So, an engagement question for us to drop into the chat is, does your company already have AI usage policies explicitly in place, or are you just kind of letting folks use AI and see how it goes? Like, do you have any sort of documented AI usage policies in place? So I think the most important conversation to have as a group before you individually, whether it's with your team or with your company, decide to use AI is it right for us to use AI at all? There's lots of populations out there that don't approve of AI. On a personal note for me, outside of my work, obviously, I play a lot of video games. Sometimes people can tell this about me when they look at me, but I play a lot of video games. And there are big swaths of my peers in the gaming community who, if they have any whiff that AI has touched any aspect of the development or release process of a game, they will not buy it. They will not use it. They will boycott it. They will say no to anything with generative AI. There was a big sweep of awards given to a particular video game recently, and they had them revoked when it was found out that the developer of that game used AI. So this is a population where if I was a game developer, I might say, hey, let's leave it out. Let's not use AI until at least the public opinion has changed significantly or the technology has changed, right? Because I know that my consumer base, enough of those consumers think that this is a bad idea, that it would reflect poorly on me as a business if I started to use it. And that might be the case with your members, right? Your members might be in the same camp as some of my peers in the gaming community. They are just opposed antithetically and entirely to AI. Some consumers also find that AI usage might cheapen a product. So I talked about this bad experience with an AI agent, and that's something that will leave a bad taste in somebody's mouth. But there's also some consumers, whether you've observed these conversations or you've been spared from them because you're not on the AI part of the internet like I am, where they might say, hey, I know in the past you used to use a robust artistic staff to develop your promotional materials for your commercials as a product. And I imagine that you paid those artists a fair wage and that you're investing a lot into your brand imagery, into your commercials and things like that. And now you're releasing AI ads, which I know are cheaper to make. I know that they are significantly lower cost to make. So now all of a sudden I'm wondering, are you struggling as a company? Like are you hurting for money and that's why you're opting to do this thing that was very obviously generated with AI? Or are you taking a strong stance that you think that there's ethical ways to use AI? But it makes me think as a consumer, or it makes certain consumers think that this is a cost-cutting measure because you might be struggling financially. And not all populations think this, not all AI implementations bring these thoughts to folks, and not all AI usage even has this connotation to it, but some things do. And so this is another conversation that you might want to have internally before you say, yes, let's go in with AI. And the last note is that there are certain types of associations or companies in general where the mission that you have as an association to serve your members or as a nonprofit to serve your constituents is antithetically opposed to one of these aspects of AI. So if I was an association that was championing water usage, right, and the fact that access to clean drinking water and making sure that we're minimizing water consumption as much as possible to save the environment, that might be an association where implementing AI, especially in a way that's public facing or visible, really goes against what we stand for. It goes against our mission statement. Same with IP integrity, or if I was a labor rights advocacy group, I might be a bad fit to use AI based on some of these concerns, at least until the dust settles and we've had some other conversations about how we can do things or how we can legislate things to be a little more constrained in some of these areas. And so these might be groups where it makes sense for us to slow roll or to look at the limited AI usage that is internal, that is not replacing somebody in terms of labor, but is, filling a role that I'm filling myself and I'm saving myself a little bit of time, right? So this is an area where we might want to be really much more sensitive or deliberate than other groups might opt to be because the work that we do is not related to any of these issues. So this involves us having some hard conversations frequently about AI. So if you take nothing away from this presentation, because I went through a lot of detailed aspects of ethical concerns, open and transparent communications are the key to making sure that we feel good about what we're doing or not doing with AI. If we just kind of stumble through our AI usage, and we hide our AI usage and we don't have conversations candidly about how it's impacting us or how it's impacting our communities, that really kind of paints ourselves into a corner sometimes where all of a sudden we get caught up in a scandal or an issue, or we just feel like all of a sudden we're just really backing the wrong horse and we're doing the wrong things. So I'd really encourage some conversations, and we'll talk about a little bit how to be empowered to have those conversations. We also, like I said, don't want to hide AI usage. So we don't want to be behind the scenes secretly training an AI to replace our staff and then spring it on them. We don't want to be using AI when we know our customers don't like it and hoping that they just don't notice. It is important for us, if we've made the decision that AI is the right tool to solve our problems, that when it's appropriate, we are judiciously sharing that we're using AI to do certain things. And I don't mean that you have to plaster on your website, everything we do has AI involved, right? Like, I don't think we need to go there, but I do think that if you get caught out, as opposed to if you disclose when appropriate your usage, those conversations are easier. And I think maybe the most important piece is that I've said it before, I'll say it again. AI is changing all the time. It's growing, it's evolving, we're realizing that there are things that it's better at and things that it's worse at, and there's new features every second, it seems. And that means that our policies and how we use the tools should change over time as we have some of these check-ins and conversations about how we feel about what we're doing with AI. So we need to have these difficult conversations, and whom should we talk to? Who should be involved in some of these conversations that we need to have? And I recommend that we do some focus groups both internally and externally because we have some concerns that are focused on our staff and how they feel and making sure they feel supported and that they can have candid conversations with us. And we know that there might be some impact that our members might feel with our AI usage. So internally, do we have a culture as a company where staff trust that we value their feedback and how they contribute to the work that we do? Does our staff feel comfortable enough to say, hey, I don't feel good about what you're asking me to do, and here's why, and that feedback will be respected and valued as they share it? Do we, as folks that are encouraging our teams to use AI, understand what will actually be helpful for them? Or are we just looking to use AI because, similarly to digital transformation or the dot-com boom, it's just everybody's doing it, so we feel obligated to also be doing it, right? Because we've had some folks, internally or some clients that we've worked with that at first felt like AI was not the right tool to solve their problems and they were nervous about it and they felt uncomfortable. And we had two paths that we could walk down. We could say, you have to use AI. Here's the tool that you have to use. Or we could say, hey, let's talk through your concerns. Let's offer you some approved AI tools and see if you like them or not. Um, and then we can continue to check in to see if your opinions change as you get a chance to use or not use the tools. Forcing it down somebody's throat is not going to help them be excited about the tools that you're asking them to use or that you're asking them to offer. Externally, do we feel like we know what our members actually want? Or again, are we just giving them an AI chatbot because we think that everybody's giving their members an AI chatbot, and so we feel obligated to also participate in the hype of using AI? Also, do we have the resources internally to build something that actually meets the needs of our members? Because building a good AI chatbot can result in really net positives for member service. It can get them service that they weren't able to get with the infrastructure that we have currently. It can really improve how they engage with us digitally. But bad AI can really turn people off from what you do as an association really quickly. And setting up a bad chatbot takes a few minutes. But setting up a good chatbot takes a long time to make sure that we get it right, that we implement it securely and safely in a way that is not just taking things away from our membership staff. And again, like I said, does AI match our brand image, or does this really something that feels kind of antithetically opposed to what we do? If we're using AI, which again, we're assuming that everybody in the room is likely using AI or is thinking about it, how should we use it? All of your AI usage, obviously, we recommend having a specific AI usage policy, but that should not conflict with your existing data integrity, legal, or staff review policies. You never want to turn on an AI that all of a sudden has broad access to a bunch of data that your IT and security team would consider protected, for example. Or you would not want to implement an AI that violates something that your lawyer has told you to do. Just because it's AI does not mean that it gets to disregard any of your existing tech policies. It's also important, like I said, to be candid and transparent when it's appropriate about using AI. This is not an area where you want to lie to people that you're talking to in terms of your stakeholders. You also want to make sure that you're selecting tools that are secure and, when possible, sourcing and training data responsibly, although that one can be challenging, at least right now, with the tools that are available to the average consumer or the average business. When I talk about tools that are secure, one of the things that I talk about is this exemption of your data being fed up into the model, right? We know that we have this worry about things that are proprietary to us going into the AI and then coming back out of the AI to somebody else. There's lots of AI tools that don't allow that to happen to your data, but not all AI tools are in that category. So if we want to make sure that we're being responsible, security is one of those elements. It's maybe a little bit outside of the ethical concerns, but it's I just like to talk to people about that when I have the opportunity. So if we're worried about what's going to happen to our intellectual property, or what's going to happen to our proprietary member information, we want to make sure that we're really reviewing in detail the kind of data compliance and output ownership and model training exemptions of our AI tools. And we want to make sure that we're having frequent check-ins to make sure that our usage matches our needs and that our concerns are being discussed and met regularly. We have some folks on our team who did not want to use AI, and so we didn't force them to. Nobody told them, hey, you need to use AI. We're going to say, change the amount of time that you have to do a task. We figured out how fast you should be able to do it with AI, and now you have to do it with AI in order to keep up with the pace of what we do as a company. That's an option, but we instead wanted our staff to feel comfortable and respected in their concerns. And so we said, hey, if you want to use AI, here's the only tool that you're allowed to use, because this is the only tool that meets our policies that we've evaluated that feels like it is well fit for our security policies and our use cases. Here's the things that you're allowed to do with that AI. So you can't use it to do whatever you want. You can't use it to create a marketing video and then just publish it on our website. You can't use it to create work that you can't then yourself review to make sure that it's accurate. But you can use it to do these things if you want to. And if you decide to use it, let me know what you think. Did it actually help you? Did it feel like this was valuable? Did it feel like this is something that makes you worry about whether or not we're going to continue to employ you to use your human brain to solve human problems? Or did you feel like you came away from that usage worried or not reassured about how you were going to use that tool? And we've had those check-ins with folks, and some folks are not on board. They don't want to use it. And at least for now, as a company, until some broad things change about these technologies, that's okay, right? For the folks that have found good use cases, for the folks that are doing things the right way, that are solving problems in the right way, we found lots of good mileage for our existing team to solve problems in more creative ways or in more effective ways or in quicker ways. Um, and for our staff who were not originally on board, we've had some folks who got to see the impacts and got to see that this was not resulting in us, you know, removing people from our team. And instead, we're just letting our team spend time in their day to do things that they're more excited about. And they said, you know what, maybe I will dip my toes in. Maybe I will give it a try. And they dipped their toes in and they found good results or bad results. So this culture of having open conversations, some of which were hard. We had some hard conversations as a team as we went and piloted some of these tools. Um, but being respectful of those concerns and not brushing them off as, hey, we're an AI first company now. We're going to march forward being all AI all the time. And if you're not on board with that, you can find a place that's less AI focused, right? That allows us to feel comfortable and stand behind the things that we're doing, even knowing some of these other ethical concerns. And if some of these ethical concerns get worse or get better over time, we might change our policy. We might go more AI, we might go less AI as the things continue to develop. But what has been really important to me and to our team is making sure that people know that the door is always open for us to continue to evaluate risks and benefits of this technology. There's not a point where we've shut the door to say, all right, we figured out, here's how we feel about AI, and we're done. We're not figuring anything else out, right? We are continuing to take the time to figure out how AI fits what we do as a technology first company, and areas where it doesn't work. And that has resulted in both, like I said, some really challenging conversations, but some really productive conversations too. And it has resulted in a lot of ways to figure out how to creatively solve problems without AI or with AI. So if you are concerned about any of these areas, or if you're the gung-ho AI evangelist on your team and you've got some other folks that you're struggling to win over, I think keeping in mind all of these ethical concerns that we've kind of talked through and weighting them with the import that they deserve before going into a conversation and kind of brushing people off, or going into a conversation and saying, hey, AI seems kind of, I don't want to do the research, but it seems bad. Maybe we just say no AI, right? I hope that this is giving some tools for you to have some of those conversations to feel at least a little bit more informed about what people are talking about when they say that there's environmental risk or when they say that there is job security concerns that they have. So with that, I wanted to open up to some more broad conversation with you in the chat because I know I shared a lot of info here, and there was a lot of things that you could have picked up on that you might be excited to kind of drill down into. So this is when I wanted to open the floor for us to have some of these more collaborative, candid conversations about what you in particular have found hard about having these conversations about using AI. So I see one. It's difficult to understand the environmental cost for usage. Every time I drive my car to work, I'm having a negative impact, and yet many of us do that without concern. And it would be really helpful to be able to quantify impact in order to make good decisions. I totally agree with this, and I think this is part of why, I come in with these stances coming in kind of hot and heavy of these are all of the things that sound really bad, but people drive their cars every day instead of taking the bus, right? Because sometimes there's not a better option. Maybe you live in an area where the only way for you to get to your place of work is to drive. Or maybe your schedule doesn't permit you to do the work that you need to do in order to put a roof over your head without driving somewhere. So this is a concern that I weigh, and the benefit that I get out of it is worth the impact that I'm having. And I agree that it would be much easier if you could truly quantify what you were doing. The best way that I have found personally for me that feels the most helpful, short of being able to put into a calculator, if I have 5 conversations with AI a day, how much water am I pouring down the drain, or how much power am I using that I wouldn't have used otherwise? Because right now I don't have that calculator for you, um, is to say, is using AI in this instance actually going to save time, save resources, or get a better result for me? Because if I'm able to save 4 hours out of my day by talking to ChatGPT for 5 minutes, and I can use those 4 hours more productively to serve my clients or to help the people that I manage on my team, that feels really worthwhile. That feels like a time where going in and, using this to help me solve a complex problem in Salesforce, that feels worth the impact that I might be having. in a way that going to ChatGPT and saying, can you help me make a grocery list, does not feel worth the impact that I might be having to me as a consumer, having evaluated my own impact, right? So I'm looking at a usage that feels like it is not frivolous, right? Or, if I'm looking to implement an AI chatbot, when previously I didn't have a chatbot and it was really impossible for folks to get quick responses from my member services team because they were inundated with email responses, and it sometimes would take them days to get back to a member. But if I implement an AI, they can get a response much quicker. They could get an instant response to their question that helps them take best advantage of their member benefits. That feels worthwhile to me. I'm not taking a job away from somebody on my team because they're still going to get the emails. They're going to answer those emails more quickly and they're going to have more time in their day. Um, and also, this is something that I'm going to get good results with. And I wish I had a more comprehensive answer for it, for this question. And it's part of why this conversation feels really important for me. Um, but currently, there is no right answer. It is a really complex cost benefit analysis where the cost is not just financial. The cost calculator that we need to look at is more complicated than just, am I saving money, right? But this is at least where my head's at. And I'm very curious, and I see that there's already some robust conversation happening about this question in the chat. Where everyone's opinion is also going to be different. And some folks on your team might think that some of these usages are less frivolous than I might find them. Um,
Hey,
so,
Arden, it's
yes.
Karen. There was a question really early in the presentation that I wanted to bring back up. Someone noted that they're really interested in this topic and any thoughts Arden has about the philosophical teachings that Anthropic is doing with Claude. Can AI develop a conscience? So there's a deep question for you.
This is a deep question, and we get into some AI research that's like well outside of the scope of what I do as a person who is an AI implementer. So you'll have to forgive me being maybe your like 101 level educator on this when this feels like a 301 level question, right? So when we start thinking about conscience as opposed to just answering questions, we are teetering on this conversation that we have about strong AI versus weak AI. Weak AI is what we have right now, where, like I said, it's got this big data set and it just is looking at the questions that you ask and it's providing an answer. Strong AI is like in a movie, like if you've seen, I think it's iRobot, where the AI actually has thoughts and feelings, and it is more like a human brain that is thinking about moral impacts, right? And we're definitely not there yet. I don't know when we're going to be there. I personally thought never. Now I would say maybe never say never when it comes to this type of technology. But what I would what I would say, at least currently with the technology that we have, is I don't know when AI will develop a conscience, but I do know that there is a big movement currently right now for LLMs like Anthropic or like ChatGPT, OpenAI, um, is that those companies and you, if you're thinking about the guardrails that you'd put up against an AI that you're presenting to your members, especially if, say, you represent youth in a community, you have a moral obligation, or the model owner and creator have a moral obligation to be the conscience of that model because it does not have a conscience right now. And we've seen, again, I'll save some of the details because they're maybe more unsavory than you wanted at a work webinar. We've seen some areas or some instances where people have had conversations with AI where a human would never have said the things to a vulnerable person that the AI said, because the AI does not have a filter about what is right and wrong in terms of recommendations to make to a person. And those situations have had very unsavory outcomes. And so, while we are at where we are at currently with the technology, I think those companies have a strong moral obligation and an ethical obligation to put guardrails in place for AI not to say certain things to people, not to make certain recommendations. And we have found that some of these companies are already making strides in diverting the AI from encouraging negative thought patterns in the person that it's having a conversation with, preventing or putting up guardrails around this type of obsession that a user might have with talking to an AI that feels personal to them, right? Which is probably not the implementations that we're going to have with our member services agent, also to be clear. But if we're looking at building an AI that is going to talk to kids at school sometimes have sensitive emotional concerns that they don't feel comfortable sharing with a person. And an AI right now is not well equipped to handle those conversations. And so maybe we don't let the AI have those conversations. Maybe we build in certain features where the AI will divert to a safety resource for those particular individuals. And I think that's another one of the ethical concerns that we need to think about that might not feel so obvious when it comes to turning on the AI or turning off the AI.
I've got another one for you, Arden.
Hmm.
Our policy is totally restrictive. How do we craft guardrails to allow access, especially since we also have situations where every piece of software is integrating LLM or renaming machine learning into AI?
Yes. So this is a really hard one to figure out how to handle, both wanting to be restrictive and also there's certain features that you can't turn off. Like I find it kind of reprehensible that every time I Google something, I have no option not to call ChatGPT or whatever, Google Gemini, I guess. I want to be able to Google something without it involving a transaction to the AI because I'm explicitly not asking Google Gemini how to solve my problem. I want a Redditor from 10 years ago to tell me how long I should bake my cookies for. I do not want the AI to maybe be wrong about it. But um, I think that right now, with the state of the tech ecosystem, a totally restrictive no AI ever policy is going to be pretty tough to continue with because there's so many areas where it's integrated into the work stream. I think it's possible to have a totally restrictive policy where you say, we're not going to bring into our work stream explicitly AI tools, right? We might not be people who are going in and getting a Midjourney subscription to generate videos, right? Um, and we might say we're going to turn off features when possible, like the Zoom AI companion, or we're going to turn off features like the Box Docs tool or Zoom Docs, right? Um, but I think the other thing that sometimes we need to be aware of is that if we can't opt out fully, maybe our policy just needs to explicitly say, we know that there will be things that you can't turn off, right? We know that there are areas where we can't opt out. Here's how we're going to review the usage policies of these tools where we can't turn it off and make sure that if there is a tool that we use in our current tech stack where it says you can't turn off the AI and you can't opt out of model training, maybe we have to look for an alternative tool for right now. Maybe we have to go back to a different, um, Office suite until Microsoft lets us opt out of certain things, right? I think it's going to be challenging to say no AI ever. But I also think that there's a stance where we can say, we are not going to intentionally generate generative AI content and share it with our members. We're not going to use Claude to write blog posts and publish them on our website. Um, we are opting out. We are removing ourselves from the equation as much as possible, and that's the best we can do. And we are just doing the best that we can do for now, and this is all we can handle, right? Um, so I think that even when you want the policy to be no AI ever, there's going to be some asterisks. And I think it's important to understand what those asterisks are and be able to defend them when they come up, if that's what you want to opt for. Or again, if you want to start opening the door a little bit, I think having these conversations as a team about where would we start opening the door and then being very deliberate about it's all AI is not allowed except this thing. This is what we're testing. This is how we started as a company. We said you can't just get a personal account of ChatGPT and just opt in and start having conversations with ChatGPT about whatever your workplace questions are. We said you can use this tool if you're an approved user to do this task and nothing else. And then we tested it out and we said this seems safe, this seems secure. We did a full SOC 2 audit of the service. We reviewed all of their privacy and model ownership policies. Um, and then this is what we went with. And then we opened things up more broadly. And unfortunately, I see lots of great questions in the chat. I think that might be all we have time for, mostly because some of these are things that I feel like we could talk about for a lot longer. I agree very much. I see somebody has noted big concerns about children using AI. And I would strongly, I'm not a parent yet, but I would strongly recommend that you encourage your children who are still in school not to use AI to do their schoolwork because there has been some pretty obvious documented evidence that that harms their intellectual development, especially in terms of their curiosity for learning. So that is an area where I would encourage parents and educators to continue to do their own research um, because like I said, it does really impact somebody's intellectual curiosity willingness to learn and ability to act independently once they're in the workplace and maybe they're not allowed to use AI anymore. But that's one that, again, I think we could talk about for a very long time. I wish we had all the time in the world to go through some of these questions because they're very meaty. But we've only got so many minutes in this session, unfortunately. So with that, I will pass the floor back over to Riley.